Good afternoon. I'm Rebecca Thomas, Vice President for Academic Affairs and Dean of Transylvania University, and it is my honor to welcome you to our 2021 Academic Convocation. Let me start by reminding you to please silence and put away your cell phone. Our Academic Convocation is a very special occasion when we gather to celebrate a new academic year. This is especially meaningful in 2021 as we gather again in our classrooms and playing fields and residence halls and other campus spaces. I'm happy to be here with so many of you in person. This ceremony offers us a chance to renew our commitment to learning together, gives us an opportunity to focus on the journey before us, and allows us to reflect on what we intend to achieve during the year. Most importantly, this is a time to come together as a community to affirm our mission and the values of a liberal education in today's complex global society. It is my pleasure to invite Reverend Emily Miller, Director of Spirituality and Religious Life, to come to the podium to offer our invocation.
Here at Transylvania University, we are a people who come from near and far, holding a diverse set of beliefs and convictions. We celebrate who we all are and know that we are better together, learning from and growing alongside one another. I'd like to invite you to be reflective now in a way that feels comfortable and appropriate to who you are, as I use words adapted from the wise Robert Randolph, the first chaplain at MIT. Please join me as we enter into a spirit of reflection. Wise and wondrous God, known by many names, heard in many voices, we invoke your presence with us today. From art to chemistry, from history to education, today we celebrate the accomplishments of those who have gone above and beyond as students and community members here at Transylvania University. Bless the work they have done thus far and the accomplishments that we know we will be excited by in the future. We particularly acknowledge those who have supported all of our roads, parents, caregivers, teachers, and mentors, for we know that it indeed takes a village. We thank you for the focus that our institution places on inclusion and involvement, that our students are well-rounded and whole, focused on their own accomplishments while also setting sights on the community around them. Make us mindful of those who have gone before us and those who will come after. And may the work of our hands continue to be both joyful and bold. Amen.
Thank you, Reverend Miller. We will now enjoy a performance of the march from Gustav Holst's A Moorside Suite by the Transylvania University Chamber Orchestra, led and conducted by Professor Ben Hawkins. To accompany this music, we will share a presentation of our students' academic and artistic achievements on the screen.
Well, good afternoon. This is the Transy crowd. Good afternoon. Thank you, Professor Hawkins. Thank you, Chamber Orchestra, for that invigorating performance. And it is so good to see you all for our opening convocation for our 21-22 academic year. It's just wonderful to see you all three-dimensionally. So thank you very much for coming. And hello to those of you who are watching the event live streamed as well. You know, this year's theme is Bridging Chasms. And the key quote informing that theme is from Baruch Spinoza, who said the following: "I have made a ceaseless effort not to ridicule, not to bewail, not to scorn human actions, but to understand them." And the theme is further defined through the following challenge for all of us. Conflict has always pockmarked our social, political, and cultural landscape. How can we generate productive dialogue to help us navigate complex and polarizing issues, and when should talk give way to action? We must build bridges to empower, inspire, and connect with one another, but when is bridge burning necessary to secure a more just future? The important thinkers, activists, and artists on this year's Creative Intelligence series will help the Transylvania community think through such questions. To rebuild, or to tear down and start anew, often a complex and painful question to grapple with, and often with no clear answer as to what is the right choice. And now there's no shortage of quotes speaking to the importance of building bridges and not walls between us. In the book of Isaiah, it says, "Thou shalt raise up the foundations of many generations, and thou shalt be called the repairer of the breach, the restorer of paths to dwell in." Likewise, there is no shortage of quotes reminding us that neither bridges nor walls build or maintain themselves. We do that. Either way, it is not passive work, it is active work. So we continue that work today as we gather for Convocation. And in this event, we're going to be looking for insights and inspiration from our distinguished guest speaker, whom Dean Thomas will introduce more formally in just a moment. But before that, I'm going to ask you to indulge me in a brief activity that I asked our first-year students to do during their induction ceremony. So first years, this is a refresher for you. Those of you who weren't at that event, this is going to be a little new for you. So I'm just going to ask you to please fold your arms, just the way you normally do. Just fold your arms. And now just sort of look up and down the row as best you can, and you'll notice that not everybody folds their arms the same way. Some people have the right hand in and the left hand out. Some have both hands in. So even in something just as natural as folding our arms, we don't all do it the same way. So now, to make you even more uncomfortable, try to reverse the way you normally fold your arms. So, okay, so that means I do this way. Okay, yeah. Feels a little awkward. Feels unnatural, uncomfortable. But I think this is an apt metaphor for our time at Transylvania. And many of the purposes for what we do is to try and get you to explore and experience difference. So don't dismiss that difference. Welcome it, explore it, recognize that it can be challenging to try something different, whether it's folding your arms or trying on a perspective or a point of view different from the one you're accustomed to looking through a certain lens at. But also at the same time understand that the other people on the row next to you are going through exactly the same thing. So go through it together in a supportive and enjoyable fashion. So let's embrace the challenge of folding arms and bridging chasms. Let's embrace this challenge in our true pioneer spirit, and let us bridge chasms together. And now it is my pleasure to invite back to the podium Dean Rebecca Thomas to introduce our distinguished guest speaker. Dean Thomas.
Thank you, President Lewis. And now I'm pleased to introduce our Convocation keynote speaker, Dr. Natasha DeJarnette. Dr. DeJarnette is an assistant professor in the Christina Lee Brown Envirome Institute at the University of Louisville Division of Environmental Medicine. She's also a professorial lecturer in environmental and occupational health at the George Washington University Milken Institute School of Public Health. Dr. DeJarnette completed her PhD and Masters of Public Health at the University of Louisville. She was awarded a postdoctoral fellowship by the National Institute on Environmental Health Science to investigate the cardiovascular risks of air pollution exposures. In 2015, she was awarded the prestigious Impact Award from the Society of Toxicology's Cardiovascular Toxicology Specialty Section for her paper, Acrolein Exposure is Associated with Increased Cardiovascular Disease Risk. Prior to joining the faculty of the Brown Envirome Institute, Dr. DeJarnette was Interim Associate Director of Program and Partnership Development at the National Environmental Health Associate, leading the areas of research, climate and health, and children's environmental health. Dr. DeJarnette is a member of the EPA's Children's Health Protection Advisory Committee, is chair of the Governing Board of Citizens Climate Education, a member of the Board of Directors of Physicians for Social Responsibility, a member of the Advisory Board of American Public Health Association's Center for Climate, Health, and Equity, special advisor to the Environmental Health and Equity Collaborative, and a member of the steering committees of the International Transformational Resilience Coalition and the Environmental Law Institute's Emerging Leaders Initiative. Dr. DeJarnette's presentation is titled Code Red, Climate Changes, Health, and Equity. Please welcome her.
Thank you so much, President Lewis, to Dean Thomas for the kind introduction, for the opportunity to be here today with you live in person. I couldn't be more excited to be here with you today, and it's been such a wonderful program. And I also want to thank Dr. Sarah Bray for the generous invitation to be here, and the team here at Transylvania behind the scenes that works hard to make such a wonderful convocation program, including Miss Cindy Witry for all her help in preparation for today. I had such a warm experience with your esteemed faculty and students, including the Pre-Health Club, as well as learning about the Urban Forest Initiative, visiting the Moreland Gallery. It's just been an absolutely incredible day, and learning about the Bingham Young Professorship Project. And I must tell you how special it is for me to be here. I'm from Georgetown, Kentucky, just a few exits up the road. And as a youth, I attended the YMCA Black Achievers Program, which was housed at Lexington Traditional Magnet School, which at the time, maybe still, was around the corner from Transylvania. So I would pass by Transylvania University and see images of hope and opportunity and a future as I was going to receive college preparation at the YMCA Black Achievers Program. So it was quite inspiring then, and never would I have imagined having the opportunity to stand before you and provide your convocation address. All of these experiences make me so grateful to be here. Now exploring your theme, bridging chasms. Climate change is a topic where we will have to bridge deep divides in society, and I must warn you as I go through this talk today, some of what I share will be quite heavy, but I'm hoping that in the end, the data and the information that I'll be discussing with you about the climate crisis will not provide despair, but will actually show opportunity. I hope it will also inspire action. Now, I'm in the field of environmental health, and just to make sure we're all on the same page, environmental health is how our environments around us, be that air, water, soil, built features, how that affects our health. And as we think about climate change and discuss climate change, I thought it would be helpful for me to share with you how I got here. I was recently asked what led me on this path, and it goes back to my childhood. I am a child of the Great Migration, and this means that my parents grew up in the Jim Crow South of Birmingham, Alabama, and moved to points north to find more opportunity. So I grew up here in Kentucky, and people of the Great Migration work really hard to keep strong connections with the family down south, calling and visiting as often as they could. And as such, they make sure that their children have strong bonds with the family back home as well. So as a child, I spent a lot of time in Birmingham on summers, school breaks, and holidays. And for me, it was the best of times. I got to play with my cousins, and they're here in these photos. And if you're wondering who I am the child that's not looking at the camera in either photo. I have a blue tie on in the left photo and a red plaid dress on in the right. But we had so much fun together, running, playing games, always outdoors, as you can see here, with not a care in the world. Actually, I did have one care. I noticed at an early age that my very well-controlled asthma would flare up when I visited Birmingham. As a child, I would have to pack extra asthma medication just in case when I would visit, causing me to ask myself, why can't I breathe when I visit Birmingham? Fast forward 20 plus years to graduate school, we were given an assignment to do a community health assessment, and we could pick any community in the US. So I decided to find out why is it that I can't breathe when I visit Birmingham. What I found out was that the North Birmingham community where my parents grew up was home to numerous hazardous facilities that had left poor air quality behind there in Birmingham. And it must be noted that when my grandparents purchased their homes in Birmingham, the home purchasers were subject to redlining. So that meant that my African American grandparents didn't necessarily have much choice over where they could live. Furthermore, that means they also didn't have much choice over what their family and themselves would be exposed to. I found that this community, going forward, is riddled with numerous health disparities, present day, low birth weight, cardiovascular disease, and other chronic diseases. Long story short, I found out that the place where my family was raised was home to numerous environmental injustices, and their impacts that we still may face today because of that. Through this, I found my passion in environmental health, and that is justice. I found my calling in environmental health. At the time, I thought it was to be the voice for the voiceless, but I now see this differently. I want to empower the voices of those rendered voiceless, and I want to ensure a seat of the table so as to give voice to the voiceless. So the Lancet, the World Health Organization, the American Public Health Association, leadership at the National Environmental Health Association, and countless other health agencies have affirmed that climate change is the greatest threat to human health. To add further evidence to support this, just last week, over 200 medical journals came together to issue a call to action on climate change. So the takeaway that I want for you to have from today is this quote from Dr. Ed Maybach. He's an expert climate and health communicator from George Mason University. And it's that climate change is real, it's happening now, it's affecting health today, but there is much that we can do about it. I share this because too often the conversation has been on polar bears and ice caps. And this is quite important, absolutely important, and important to our health and ecology. However, what's often been left out of the conversation is that climate change affects human health as well. Also, one important thing I want you to keep in mind as I share today is that though this is a global phenomenon, climate change is experienced locally. I described to you an air quality burden in Birmingham, Alabama. It's drought in the west. It's vector-borne disease in the northeast. It's sea level rise along the coast, and the list goes on. So I want you to consider that these differences can be felt by different geographic locations, as well as different population segments, and even by neighborhood, as we'll touch on in just the coming slides. So the elephant in the room is, why am I talking about climate change when we have the COVID-19 pandemic? Or even, why am I focused on climate change in a time of racial reckoning? Well, we don't have the luxury to wait on one or the other to end. In 2018, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change issued a statement that told us that we have 12 years to act on climate before catastrophic damage. We've unfortunately seen numerous examples of climate events this year, some of which may have affected you and your families, including the extreme cold in Texas, the extreme heat in the Pacific Northwest that actually melted roads. At the same time, we had extreme heat waves that were hitting the East Coast. This was the hottest summer on record in the US. I'm tired of every year saying that this was the hottest every year, but this was the hottest summer on record. In addition, we've got wildfires on the West Coast, and we're in the aftermath of Hurricane Ida and now Hurricane Nicholas. All of these have affected health. This is why we simply cannot wait. Dr. Jalon White Newsom, one of my environmental health heroes, she is also an environmental justice scholar, had this to say connecting our three emergencies of COVID, climate change, and the racial reckoning. Across the U.S., climate change and COVID-19 are playing out in tandem. The warming planet drives increasingly extreme weather, complicating the pandemic's impacts and complicating disaster response. At the same time, these dual threats have exposed the profound inequities that divide and weaken us. COVID-19 has laid bare health disparities in the U.S., dating back as early as April 2020, and we began to notice differences in death rates, particularly among people of color and older adults, fueled by determinants of health and systemic factors, including racial disparities in housing, employment, education, and environmental exposures. And data from November 2020 demonstrates some of the lasting impacts of the COVID disparities that have been identified in people of color, where these populations demonstrated up to 4 times increased risk of contracting COVID, being hospitalized for COVID, or dying from COVID. So what I want to share with you that I find interesting is that many of the same populations that bear a greater risk of COVID also bear a heavier burden of climate change. And the health threats are vast. And we are all at risk to the health threats of climate change. However, there are some groups that are more vulnerable to these threats, and climate change actually acts as a threat multiplier for them, exacerbating some of the inequities that these groups already experience. I'll come back to children momentarily, but for older adults, chronic diseases may render them more susceptible to climate change. Impoverished communities may lack the resources for support infrastructure or to recover following an extreme weather event. And these areas often have limited access to needed health services. Communities of color are more likely to live on the fence lines of industrial polluters. The single strongest predictor of where hazardous polluters are located is race. It's not income, it's not education, it's race. People of color make up a majority of people living within 3 kilometers of a hazardous waste facility, leaving them more exposed and thereby more susceptible. Indigenous communities have close ties, close cultural and religious ties to the land, but climate is affecting their ability to hunt and gather food from the land and pass along these religious and cultural traditions to the next generation. People with a disability may face challenges in evacuating safely if there are mobility challenges. Undocumented residents, they may not feel comfortable evacuating to a shelter for fear of deportation. And similarly, members of the LGBTQ+ community may also not feel comfortable evacuating to a storm shelter for fear of discrimination or worse. I share these burdens faced by these populations because we can't truly address climate change if our most vulnerable don't benefit from climate action. Therefore, we can't meaningfully address climate change without addressing justice. Even our most well-intentioned efforts to address climate change will be undermined if health isn't at the center. Now, transitioning back to children. Children suffer disproportionately from the health impacts of climate change. And you see here, 88% of the global burden of climate change falls on children younger than 5 years of age. This is an injustice. This is a generational justice issue. But I am inspired by our youth. They're raising their own voices and not waiting for others to voice their concerns. I accompanied a group of students that are part of Schools for Climate Action. They organized visits on the Hill and met with their congresspeople and called for action on this generational injustice. This is a great example of giving voice to the voiceless. So I'm going to briefly step through these threats and expose some of the inequities born or exacerbated by them. We all deserve clean air to breathe, but climate is decreasing the quality of the air that we breathe. It's increasing carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere, trapping heat and pollutants below, much like a blanket traps heat. And our air pollution decreases our air quality, but also this extra trapped heat further decreases the quality of the air that we're breathing. But also, climate change promotes drought conditions, and these create environments that are conducive to wildfires, which further decrease the smoke from wildfires, further decreases the quality of the air that we're breathing. And we can see examples of this. The wildfires in California, particularly the Caldor fire, was so strong and so intense that the wildfire haze reached as far east as New York State. And we certainly felt it here in Kentucky. We had an air quality alert for about a week and a half associated with this haze. In addition, also we have a longer, hotter, warm season, so we have a longer pollen season. We have more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, so this actually creates more intense pollen. So we have a longer and more intense pollen season. Bad news for allergy sufferers, but another allergen that we're exposed to is mold, because we have more flooding, and that can leave behind mold in our homes, workplaces, and schools. So poor air quality is associated with increased risk of heart and lung disease, and I study its relationship to heart disease. In addition, this intensifying pollen season is increasing our allergy symptoms. All of this is more than just a nuisance. This increases the likelihood of school and workplace absences and even decreased productivity. But I don't want to leave you in despair. I can't see the bottom half of your faces, but I can sense that I'm telling you some really heavy information. But there's much that's being done to address air quality. Increasing access to nature, where trees are an air purifier. Testing air quality, issuing air quality alerts, making sure that those are received far and wide, and enforcing regulations are some things that are happening in the workforce to protect air quality. And got to go back to COVID for just a moment. We don't experience climate or COVID separately. There are intersections here where climate change makes COVID worse, and COVID complicates disaster response. Research from Dr. Francesca Dominici and others shown in this Wu and others 2020 study demonstrates that cities with higher pollution have higher COVID mortality. And their research suggests that even a 1-unit increase in fine particulate matter, those are particulates that we breathe that can reach all the way deep into our lungs, a 1-unit increase in exposure to those has associated with an 8% increase risk of COVID-19 mortality, meaning that our more polluted cities had higher COVID mortality. And then Brandt and others lay out a case for further investigation of the relationship between air pollution and COVID-19 mortality disparities by race. And I share this because of the health disparities that have been laid bare by COVID. This warrants a need for further understanding of the disproportionate burden of air pollution on COVID mortality. I also want to shine a spotlight on some of the work that we are doing at University of Louisville's Environment Institute in partnership with the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences and the Nature Conservancy. We partnered together for the Green Heart Project. In this project, we are planting trees for healthier air. So we are looking at health outcomes and air quality, and then we're planting trees, which actually will take place this October. We're going to begin planting trees, and then we're going to follow the conditions of air quality and health outcomes after planting these trees, because this has the exposure to increased residential greenness has great benefits on health and on removing air pollution. So in 2016, the U.S. Climate and Health Assessment reported that climate change has increased the severity, frequency, and duration of extreme heat events. And this is especially concerning because heat is the top cause of natural weather-related death here in the U.S. And this increases our risk of heat-related illness, which can include heat stroke, which can be deadly if not addressed quickly. But this also increases our risk of heart and lung diseases, as mentioned before. So populations that are most sensitive include older adults with the chronic disease, but they also may be more socially isolated and not get those heat alert warnings. Children, they spend more time outdoors, but they also lack the impulse control to know when they've overdone it or need to cool off and get a cold drink of water. In addition, communities of color and impoverished communities are more likely to be in urban heat islands, and urban heat islands can be up to 20 degrees hotter at night than their surrounding areas. And then there are people that work outdoors in agriculture and construction, and they would be more exposed to extreme heat. But there is a lot of work that's taking place to address extreme heat, including educating people on what to do when there is a heat alert, disseminating these alerts and making sure they're disseminated far and wide, assuring access to cooling centers. That has been challenged in this COVID-19 pandemic. Having cool roofs on homes or businesses and workplaces that actually reflect the sun's energy rather than absorbing the sun's heat. Changing gears to extreme weather. The increased carbon dioxide in the atmosphere is increasing surface water temperatures, making the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events both more frequent and more extreme. 2017 was a record-breaking year for hurricanes in the U.S., with hurricanes Harvey, Irma, and Maria all making landfall within a very narrow window of time here in the U.S. And these images here are from Hurricane Harvey. Then insert 2020. We went all the way into the Greek alphabet of naming hurricanes. So more landfall than ever occurred in the U.S. in 2020. So these images here are really to showcase the young victims of Hurricane Harvey, and children are especially susceptible to extreme weather because they often rely on adults for decision-making that will protect their health and their well-being. They're not able to make full decisions to protect their health and safety, so they're at risk for physical injury and even death. But we all are at risk for the physical threats of extreme weather, but there are also mental wellness and well-being challenges that extreme weather imposes on us. Nearly half of Hurricane Katrina survivors developed a mood or anxiety disorder in the aftermath, and 1 in 6 developed PTSD. So actions to protect health in extreme weather include ensuring evacuation access. This is also something that's been challenged by COVID, but the sooner and further that we can evacuate, the better our health outcomes are. So that means that we need access to evacuation shelters, but also transportation to be able to get there, all challenged in the current pandemic. Climate change causes increased flooding on one hand and drought on the other. So when we have a heavy flooding event, this can cause our stormwater to overflow our sewer water system, sending contaminated water into our drinking water supply. One study reports that over half of waterborne disease outbreaks in the U.S. were preceded by an extreme rainfall event. But then there's also drought. With drought, we see impacts in agriculture like decreased crop yield or even decreased nutrient quality of crops. This can be linked with malnutrition. And then communities with close ties to the land, like indigenous communities or agricultural communities, they bear a higher social and economic burden of drought. But there are many things that are being done to address flooding and drought, including assessing water quality, issuing water advisories, restricting developing in areas that are flood prone, also having designs that better handle stormwater runoff, and relocating buildings and roads that repeatedly flood. Climate change is also increasing the amount and geographic distribution of disease-carrying ticks and mosquitoes. The Lancet Countdown on Climate and Health U.S. brief reported that there was a tripling in vector disease here in the U.S. from 2004 to 2016. As such, we're seeing increases in Lyme disease in the Northeast, particularly West Nile virus and Zika. And populations that would be very sensitive to this include pregnant people, where exposures to Zika virus during pregnancy can increase the risk of microcephaly. But there are many things that are being done about vector-borne disease. Public health professionals are educating doctors. I know of a program in Maine where they're educating doctors to know to be on the lookout for increased cases of Lyme disease in their clinics, and also equipping physicians with tools to be able to pass on, and research, literature, I should say, to pass on so that people in the community know to wear long clothing that covers their skin, that's lightweight, or to use insect repellent. But also there's much work done in the environmental health workforce around vector control. Vector control is the second most popular area within the environmental health workforce. There's other things that we do, like eradicating standing water that can be, create a habitat for vectors. So climate change not only threatens our mental health, but our physical health, as I mentioned. And I shared with you the links between extreme weather and mental health burdens, but also extreme heat can increase risk of depression, of violence, of suicide, and extreme heat can even render inactive some psychotropic medications. Now, as you can see, it's not always easy being green. Someone said that to me yesterday, and it really resonated. It's not always easy being green, but it's always the right time to do what's right. So this story is going to get political. Bear with me. In 2016, I was working at the American Public Health Association, and we were planning for our Year of Climate Change and Health initiative, which was to be 2017. And we had been planning for it all year. We were lining up partners, and we were very much looking forward to launching this effort where we would raise awareness that climate change is a health issue. So then the 2016 election happened, and everyone took a collective pause and said, is this something that we still want to do in 2017? The question is, with an administration that had acknowledged that climate change would not be a priority, do you want to launch something massive at the start of the next year to immediately pit yourself as an enemy, or it could be perceived as being an enemy of the administration? So Dr. Georges Benjamin, our executive director, was charged with this question. You can see him here in the gray suit. And when asked, do we need to put a pause on our plans towards this 2017 Year of Climate Change and Health, he looked at us, didn't miss a beat, and said, and this is a quote from Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, "It is always the right time to do what's right." And moving forward, the Year of Climate Change and Health was a rousing success. It was a wonderful initiative. We had over 60 partners to join forces and countless members to participate in this year. A highlight was this photo where we got to host a meeting alongside Vice President Al Gore. So whatever path you choose, when faced with opportunities to bridge chasms, it's always the right time to do what's right. As I leave, I return to the faces of these children in Birmingham, Alabama. Look who learned how to identify the camera and smile at it now. After I began sharing my story of my asthma flare-ups when I visited Birmingham, my aunt shared with me that her daughter, that's my cousin, it's a little girl here in the blue jean jacket, had the same experiences. And she said that her daughter had very severe asthma, But when they moved away from Birmingham, her asthma practically vanished. No one should have to move away to have healthier air and healthier lives. This is why I equip decision makers and regulators with information needed to protect communities. This is why I work to empower communities, giving voice to the voiceless. This is how I'm bridging chasms. And I thank you for your time today. Please be well and stay safe.
Dr. DeJarnette, thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. Now, please welcome the Transylvania University Choir and Transylvania University Singers, led by Professor Regan McNay, Director of Choral Activities, and organist Angela Eden. Please enjoy their singing of our alma mater, Hail Transylvania. Unlike most years, this year we will ask you not to sing with them, but please stand if you're able. Thank you to our Transylvania University Choir, Transylvania University Singers, Dr. McNay, Angela Eden. Thank you all. As we are now well into fall term, I hope you're acclimating well to university life back on campus, and I challenge you to embrace the values that we embrace at Transylvania: independent thinking, open-mindedness, creative expression, and commitment to lifelong learning and social responsibility. In particular, I encourage you to be bold pioneers. Dare to try new things. Dare to engage in discussion with your classmates, especially when you disagree. Remember that it is a sign of respect to engage across lines of difference and disagreement with candor and with humility. Remember that learning can be like exercising. If it never feels difficult, you may not be pushing yourself hard enough. Do not let perceived failures discourage you. They can signal what needs more work. Reach out to others when you need support. Be sure to offer encouragement when others need it as well. Before we conclude our academic convocation, please join me in expressing appreciation to Associate Dean Sarah Bray and her assistant Cindy Witry for coordinating today's event. I would also like to thank our First Engagement Scholars for their work today. This concludes Transylvania University's 2021 Academic Convocation. I wish you all an exciting, challenging, and successful academic year.